Okay, one last conditional talk. So we're going to be looking at ternary operators. We'll also do a little quiz as well. And then we'll look at some sample code and then hopefully on to loops very, very soon. I'm not sure if I turned off the bitwise operators, but if I didn't, we might go over those as well. So let's try a little quick exercise just to remind you how a switch statement works. I would like you to write a switch statement. Now the grades we have are only 85, 75, 65, 55, and 0. There's no 76s or 77s. Write a switch statement that spits out or it returns the character A, B, C, D, or F depending on the grade coming in. And the grades are 85, 75, 65, 55, and 0. So hopefully, do I have an answer for that? Yeah, I have an answer for that. So don't pause. Try work it out and then we'll go over the answer in a second. Okay, so let's check this out. You could put in the main method. You don't have to put in the main method. And I could also do a printf statement. I just wanted to have some kind of character. I was intentionally somewhat vague on this. I could also move this down on multiple different lines if I want to. But really you want something that's short, sweet, and sort of compact with a switch statement. So I have a grade. The grade goes in here. And I go through my various cases. I could include a default. The default could have been the 0 for all I know. It's a possibility, or it depends on how I wanted to do this. So here's my case 8. So switch the grade, the thing that I'm actually evaluating. If the grade is equal to 85, then the letter is going to be equal to A. I'm going to set the letter A, and I'm going to break. If the value for the grade was 75, then it's going to be B, C, D, F. And a blank, if you give me anything other than the expected values, I could have a blank, right? The letter grade is, it could be a question mark, right? You can play with it. Depending on how the problem is described to you, it would have a different implementation. Here's the final piece, the ternary statement. This is about as compact as you're going to get. It is for if statements where you're not doing anything fancy at all. You're just sort of, normally it's, I want to set a variable, and I'm not sure what the value of that variable is going to be. Depends on the circumstances. So it's, the value is going to be 4, or it's going to be 17, depending on whether I have this, right? How much damage does Link do? Depends on if he has a Master Sword. So if has Master Sword, then do 2 damage, otherwise do 1 damage. Something like that. Okay. So a ternary statement is this inline, one-line statement. If the condition is true, do this, otherwise do that. And it's trying to simplify the code. There's no real complex code. You can have ternary statements inside of ternary statements. So it can have this variable is equal to condition, question mark, another ternary expression right there, and maybe another ternary expression in here. I can nest these things, but you're trying to make it so for little short kind of evaluations, not anything overly complex. It can be hard to parse through if it gets really overly nuanced. If this condition is satisfied, then I'm going to assign the value A to the variable. Otherwise, I'm going to assign whatever B is here, this thing here, to the variable. And the easiest thing to look at is actually just an example. So variable 1 is equal to, if var2 is greater than 0, var1 is going to be equal to 2. Otherwise, var1 is equal to 4, right? So if var2 happens to be positive, if var2 is positive and not 0, then var1 is going to be equal to 2. Otherwise, var1 is equal to 4. In this case, I have var1 is assigned to the value of var3 if var2 is negative. So if let's say you need to have it a positive value, well, var2 is not positive, so therefore I'm going to set var1 equal to var3. Otherwise, I'm going to set var1 to equal 0, or whatever the case is, right? The absolute value is one of those classic examples, how you can do it with a ternary expression. var1 is reset to 0 if it goes over a certain range. So if the range is greater than 20, I'm going to make the value 0. Otherwise, I'm going to keep it as it is. So their maximum value you can have is a 20, and you say it's 21. Nope, you get a 0 now, right? If I don't give any bonus points and magically somehow your grade is 102%, okay, well, that would be a bad policy, but I give you now 0 on the course. Bad policy, but I wouldn't do that, but still. Right? Or I can see, what is the size of var2? What's the size of var3? And depending, or I can get the size of var2 or the size of var3. So if var1 is less than 4, I can get the size of var2 and put that in var1. Otherwise, I get the size of var3 and put it into var1. Whatever the case is. They have limited functionalities, but they're meant to be simple and fast, somewhat easy to read, without all the curly braces. And unlike a switch statement or an if else, they really only occupy one line. They're supposed to be easy to read, and my comment is if not me, and thus debugging can be a lot simpler, but it's still on one line. It's really kind of dense. And the CPU compilation can actually be a lot faster that way too. So here's an example of an if else statement written as a ternary expression. So if the variable is greater than 0, then I'm going to get the value 4. Then the value is going to be 4. Otherwise, I can check to see if variable is less than 0, and then I give it 6. Otherwise, I give it 8. I have a nested ternary expression here. If variable 2 is greater than 0, variable 1, var1 is equal to 4. If it's not greater than 0, so let's say it's var2 is equal to 0, and var3 is equal to 0, what happens? So var2 is, I don't go into this condition, I go into this condition, this whole thing. var2 is equal to 0, so I don't go into this condition, it's actually equal to 8. var1 will be equal to 8 if var2 and var3 are both equal to 0, for example. So how about this? With bonus points, some students end up with more than 100%, but we really can't give somebody 103%. Like, we get in trouble, and it's a big thing. So I want you to have, you pass in your grade into this particular expression. So let's say the variable is my grade, or whatever I want to call it. And if the value is greater than 100, I want you to set it to 100. Just cap it off at 100. So no matter what you give me as a grade, if it's greater than 100, make it 100. Okay. So try writing that ternary expression. Ternary expressions, by the way, do come up on exams, especially in the short answer questions, or I give sample code for you to read, and there's a ternary expression there. So you have to get used to them, but so give it a try. What do you think? What would the ternary expression look like for this? There we go. So I'm going to call my variable grade in this case, or it could have been my grade. If the grade is greater than 100, I set it to 100. Otherwise, it's just the grade. Right? That will work. I could have also said if it's less than 100, return grade. Otherwise, return 100. Right? It doesn't matter which way I did it. So, I don't know if I have a text on this slide. We're going to do an actual quiz for ternary expression, and let's see how you do. So, do the actual quiz, and then we're going to come back one last little bit of advice. So, in terms of advice for figuring out your if statements, I just nerded out here. So, if I have a bunch of code, if I have enumerated values, I want to use a switch statement. My code is going to be a switch statement. Otherwise, if I'm trying to save space and I have very simple code, then my code is some form of ternary expression. Otherwise, use an if else statement. Right? The default is use an if else statement. Right? Otherwise, for special occasions, you can use a switch or a ternary expression. And that's normally your thought process on how you decide what kind of conditional you're going to use. Okay, so we looked at program structure through these series of lectures. We looked at if, and else statements. We looked at switch statements, and we looked at ternary statements. So if you want extra practice, make a ternary expression for the absolute value, and maybe write a decimal to hex that converts a decimal number less than 16 to hexadecimal using a switch statement, right? How could I change, instead of doing all this math that we were doing before, could I use it with a switch statement? Could I make it work? Can I use an if statement to ensure the data is actually safe and make sure it works, right? What I could do is I have some kind of function that takes in an integer. It spits out whatever the hexadecimal value for it. So it would be, let's say, a character, 0, 1 to A, B, C, F, right? So dec to hex would take in some number less than 16, spits out a hexadecimal value. So you can use a switch statement for this, but also put an if statement around it to make sure that the value going in is in fact less than 16. And then after that's all said and done, replace that if statement with a ternary expression to make sure that the value is strictly less than 16. Greater than or equal to 0, less than 16. Okay, so try that out, and I'm going to see if I have the bitwise operators. No, I do not. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I've removed those bitwise operator stuff. Let me come back to this a bit later, but you can have a look at this if you're looking at the slides, because I think it confuses a lot of people, but I want you to get exposure to what's happening. The reason we have to look at binary is there are actual things in C that actually use the binary representations of these numbers to do things like figuring out your network ID, that sort of thing. And so bitwise operators end up coming up in weird and wonderful ways that you wouldn't have expected, but they're especially useful once we actually do the preprocessor instructions. So, all right, thanks everyone, and next time around we're finally going to get to looping, which really gives us the power in C. All right, thanks everyone.